So the first thing we're going to do for Unit 4 is Lesson 2, and these are those practice problems that we are doing. So the first one we have a cyclist who is riding his or her bike 3.75 miles in 0.3 hours. How fast was she? Interesting. I guess we know it's a lady or a woman or a girl going in miles per hour. Well, they gave us the format that they want us to use. So whenever we use proportions, ratios, it's really helpful to put the words first. We so far have been setting these up in the form of tables and charts, which you can continue to do, but for this unit, we're really going to be focusing on these rates, ratios, proportions. So we have miles per hour. So we were told in the original set of information that it was 3.75 miles in 0.3 hours. Well, if it's per hour, we know we want that to be per 1 hour. So all we have to do is divide. You can go ahead and get out your calculators to make that happen. 3.75 divided by 0.3. I know that some of you are still getting confused about what order things should be divided in. You know, what comes first when you put it in your calculator. Well, I always like to think about things as going from top down. Think about it. When you read, do you start at the top of your page or the bottom of the page? Obviously, you start at the top. So it's the same thing when you divide. Go from top to bottom. So when you put this into your calculator, you would put in 3.75 divided by 0.3, and you should get the answer of 12.5. And because we already have our words set up in the beginning, we know this is 12.5 miles per 1 hour. Whoops. At this rate, how long will it take her to go 4.5 miles? So we know that we already have our format set up in the previous problem, miles per hours. I'm going to use, really, you can use this one or this one to set this up, but we'll go ahead and use the one that's in our unit rate. So that's 12.5 over 1. And we know that we want that to be equal to 4.5 miles. So that would go where miles is located, which is on the top. So that's 4.5 over 1. Oh, not over 1. Over x, because that's the thing that we don't know. Now, in this case, we're going to cross multiply to find our answer, because I don't know how to get from 12.5 to 4.5 right off the top of my head. So I'm going to cross multiply, and I know that 12.5 times x, which is 12.5x, we know when we multiply a number times a variable, they just sit right beside each other, because that means multiplication, and that's going to be equal to 4.5 times 1, which is simply 4.5. So I've got 12.5x equal to 4.5. Now you should recall that we did this in the beginning of the year. We've done this quite a few times now. How do I solve this and get this to x alone? Well, I say to myself, a number next to a variable means to multiply. The opposite of multiplication, of course, is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by this number that the x is being multiplied by, which in this case is 12.5. Both sides, 12.5. That is a 5, but I will make it look more clear for you. There you go. 12.5 divided by 12.5, we should know is 1, cancels out. I'm left on this side with x equals, again, grab those calculators, and you should 4.5 divided by 12.5 is 0.36. Whoopsie, sorry about that. 0.36, and that is hours. It is now important to make sure that we're labeling everything, and there is your answer. Next thing we have here, number 2, a recipe calls for sparkling grape juice. It's got 1 1/2 quarts of sparkling water and 3/4 of a quart of grape juice. How much sparkling water would you need to mix with 9 quarts of grape juice? Well, we are very simply going to set up our proportion. Our proportional relationship always starts with words first. So, in this case, let's compare sparkling water to grape juice. What they gave us was 1 1/2 quarts of sparkling water. 1 1/2 quarts sparkling water to 3/4 of a quart of grape juice. How much sparkling water would we need for 9 quarts of grape juice? Grape juice is on the bottom of this setup right here. So if I continue straight across, I know that that 9 is going to go on the bottom, and the thing that we don't know is on top. We're going to make that x. Next thing, I know I'm going to be cross multiplying to solve this. So I'm going to have 3/4 x, which is 3/4 times x. And in this direction, that's going to be equal to 1 1/2 times 9. Well, I've got my math Macarena to revert to here because I've got a mixed number multiplied times this 9. So 1 1/2. I need to change that mixed number to an improper fraction. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 more is 3. So this is 3/2 times 9/1. I'm multiplying. I don't need to do anything other than keep the top with the top and the bottom with the bottom. 3 times 9 is 27, and 2 times 1 is 2. So now I know I've got 3/4 x equal to 27/2. Just like before, how am I going to get that x by itself? Well, I know that if I'm multiplying by 3/4, the opposite of that would be to divide both sides by 3/4. And I know that this starts to look very funny as I move along. This would be divided by 3/4. I am running around out of room there, but I am going to rewrite it up here. I know 3/4 divided by 3/4, of course, it's going to cancel out and give me 1. So I'm going to have x is equal to 27/2 divided by 3/4. Go right back to my math Macarena. First we will divide. Keep the first. Flip the second. Now we multiply. Keep the top with the top and the bottom with the bottom. So I end up with 108/6. I can go ahead and divide. You can get out your calculator for that if you need to. And you should find that the x is going to equal 18 quarts of, what were we missing? Sparkling water. Okay, move along. We're still using that recipe for sparkling grape juice. And now we need to know how much grape juice we're going to mix with 15/4 quarts of sparkling water. So I'm going to keep my very same ratio set up. I'm actually just going to abbreviate this sparkling water to grape juice. Sparkling water is 1 1/2. And grape juice is 3/4. And we need to make that equal to 15/4 quarts of sparkling water. Sparkling water is on the top of my ratio. So I'm going to put 15/4 here. And the missing number is here. Where my x is. So I'm going to be cross multiplying to solve these. And that means I'm going to have 1 1/2 x, which I'm going to go ahead and change that mixed number into an improper fraction. I know that 1 1/2 is 3/2. What's that? Times x is 3/2 x is equal to 3/4 times 15/4. Well, Math Macarena. So this stays the same. 3/2 x equals top with the top and the bottom with the bottom. 3 times 15 is 45. 4 times 4 is 16. How am I going to solve that? 3/2 times x, the opposite of multiplying times 3/2, is of course dividing by 3/2. So both sides are going to be divided by 3/2. I know this looks really funny at first, but you'll get used to seeing it. The 3/2 divided by 3/2 cancels out. I'm left with x equals 45/16 divided by 3/2. Math Macarena tells me to keep the first, flip the second, then you multiply, keep the top with the top, and the bottom with the bottom. Last we will reduce, and now I need to look for the largest gazinta. That will help me first. What number gazinta 90 and gazinta 48? Well, after I do some finagling with some of these numbers, I should know that that is 6. So divide both top and bottom by 6. I'm actually going to bring that down here. So 90 divided by 6 is 15. 48 divided by 6 is 8. I'm going to reduce that yet again because 8 is too small to hold up that big, giant 15. I know 8 goes into 15 one time with 7 left over, so that's 1 7/8. What was I missing? I was missing grape juice, so that's 1 7/8 quarts of grape juice. Next problem. We're continuing with our sparkling grape juice and our recipe, and now this one is a little bit different because this calls our attention to the entire recipe. We want to make 100 quarts of punch in this particular case. So if I'm going to be making the entire thing of punch, I need to know how much punch there is in my original recipe. So that means I would have to take these two measurements and add them together because they're both liquids. Adding the amount of grape juice and the amount of sparkling water together will give me the total amount of sparkling grape juice that makes. So I'm going to add 1 1/2 plus 3/4. Well, I'm going to use my trusty acronym that I've learned. I love eating apples and avocados. Yummy! So improper fractions are the first thing I'm going to do. I need to change that 1 1/2 to an improper fraction. I know that it becomes 3/2 plus 3/4. Next thing I need to do is to figure out what the least common multiple of 2 and 4 is. Well, hopefully that's an obvious one to you. Least common multiple of 2 and 4 is 4, because 2 and 4 both gazinta 4. So my new denominator is going to be 4. I'm adding. And now I need to change both of those denominators to be equal to 4. So how do I get from 2 to 4? Well, I know that I multiply 2 times 2, so therefore I'm going to do 3 times 2, which is 6. This other one already is 4, so that can stay the same. I take my 6 and my 3, I bring them up here. So I've got 6 plus 3, which is equal to 9. Bring that right down. That's my new numerator, and my denominator stays the same. So I've got 9/4 total quarts. Now I need to go back to how much of each ingredient would I need. So I'm going to take this information of knowing that I need 9/4 in total to compare to find out I'm going to make 100 total quarts. So I'm going to set up two separate ratios here, two separate proportions, I should say. One to figure out how much sparkling water I need, and another to figure out how much grape juice we need. So my first ratio, we're going to set up sparkling water to total. So the amount of sparkling water would be 3/2. 3/2. And I don't want my total to be 100. No, 3/2 is not my 100. I have 3/2 of a quart in 2 1/4 quarts, and I want to have 100 quarts. Sorry about that. Got a little distracted here and didn't mean to confuse you. So I'm going to cross multiply to solve this. So I know that I'm going to do 2 1/4 x equals 3/2 times 100. So 2 1/4 x, top with the top and the bottom with the bottom, gives me 300 halves. Okay, so before I do anything else, I know that this should be pretty obvious, that 300 over 2 is actually equal to 150. So I'm going to rewrite my equation that I have so far. So it says 2 1/4 x is equal to 300 divided by 2 is 150. So that should make things a little bit easier as we move along. Now, my next step, I know that I'm multiplying times 2 1/4, so therefore I'm going to be dividing both sides by 2 1/4. These, of course, are going to cancel out. I'm going to be left with x is equal to 150 divided by 2 1/4. I'm going to rewrite that. I can't leave my mixed number like that, so I'm actually simply going to cross this right out, because 2 1/4, if I write that as an improper fraction, 2 times 4 is 8, plus 1 more is 9, so that's 9/4. Now I'm going to use my Math Macarena, and I'm going to keep the first, flip the second, then we multiply, keep the top with the top and the bottom with the bottom. So 100 times 4 is 600. 150 times 4 is 600. 1 times 9 is 9. I'm going to reduce that because that 9 is obviously way too small to be holding up that big, giant 600. How many times does 9 go into 600? You can go ahead and use your calculator, but you're going to see a funny looking decimal. So understand that that decimal should really be a fraction, so it should be 66 and 6/9. And then that does reduce to 66 and 2/3 quarts of sparkling water. Now we're going to use the same process to figure out how much grape juice we need. Now I know some of you are saying, well, why don't we just subtract 66 and 2/3 from 100? Well, we can, but really that should be how we double check our math after we go through all of this. So I'm going to set up my proportion. This time I'm going to have the amount of grape juice over the total. The amount of grape juice is going to be, how much grape juice did we originally have? It was 3/4. Sorry, it took me a minute to go back and find that number. I apologize for giving you that big, giant, long pause. So here we are. It's grape juice is 3/4 of a quart over the total of 2 1/4, which we can go ahead and change that to 9/4 when we rewrite it below, because we know that it is right here, 9/4. We can leave that, use that, going on. I know that's going to be equal to some unknown number over 100. So, of course, we are going to be cross-multiplying. So, and again, don't forget I'm changing that 2 1/4. So that is going to give us 9/4 times x, or 9/4 x, is equal to 3/4 times 100. I know that I want to go ahead and multiply this, top with the top, bottom with the bottom. So that's 9/4 x equals 300 divided by 4. Well, I should know, or I can at least use my calculator to tell me that 300 divided by 4 is 75. So that's 9/4 x equals 75. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide both sides. Dividing by 9/4, multiplying by 9/4, the opposite of that is dividing by 9/4. So I'm going to divide this side by 9/4 and this side by 9/4. These two cancel. I'm left with x is equal to 75 over 1 divided by 9/4. My trusty Math Macarena. X equals, I'm going to keep the first, flip the second, then you multiply. I know that 75 times 4, well, that's kind of funny. I just divided 300 by 4 to get 75, so I know that's going to give me 300. 1 times 9 is 9, so I've got 300/9. You should know where this is going. I have to reduce this. How many times does 9 go into 300? Well, it goes into it 33 with 3 left over 9ths, and that also has to reduce to 33 and 1/3. 1/3 quarts of grape juice. Next problem, we're at the deli counter now, and someone is buying ham, another person is buying turkey, and somebody else is buying roast beef. And we are basically being asked to find the unit rate for each of these because they're asking us which is the least expensive and which is the most expensive per pound. That tells us it's the unit rate. So if we go ahead and find the unit rate for each and every one of these, let's start with the ham. And they've told us that ham, so it's per pound. Just to be clear, that means whenever we set up our ratios, it's going to be money over pounds, which that is not the correct abbreviation for pounds, but that is irrelevant at this point. So ham is going to be $14.50 per 1 3/4 pounds. Now, we're being faced with a decimal and a fraction here, and I know you've heard that it upsets the math gods because it's rude to change fractions to decimals and decimals to fractions without permission. However, in this case, we've got a fraction and a decimal, so what are we going to do? Well, I'm sure that everybody knows that 1 3/4, or at least you should. If you don't, you can take out that trusty calculator and figure it out, but that 1 3/4 is 1.75. So feel free to go ahead and change that in this case to 1.75. And again, use your calculator. You've got 1450 divided by 1.75. That is going to give us 8.287. I know it goes on from there. However, this is money, so we know that we need to round it to our hundredths place, which is right there. So that's going to equal $8.29, and that's per 1 pound. Next thing we're going to do, next thing is turkey. We're going to do this the exact same way we did the other one. We've got money over pounds. So how much money did it cost for turkey? It was $26.25 this person spent. And that was for 2.5 pounds. Same thing, we're faced with a decimal and a fraction. We're going to go ahead and change that that fraction to a decimal. So I've got 26.25 divided by 2.5. You should get an answer. We don't have to round anything here. It's 10.5. So that's going to give us $10. Remember to write it as money. It doesn't make sense otherwise. $10.50 per 1 pound. Last thing we're going to do here is the roast beef. So the roast beef, wait a second. We know it's going to be money over pounds. The roast beef cost $5.50 for 3/8 of a pound. Oh my gosh, Mrs. De Silva, I don't know what 3/8 is in a decimal. Well, hopefully you remember that a fraction is really a division problem. So if I leave that $5.50 alone up top, and I take my 3/8 and I divide it, remember, top to bottom, like you're reading a book. So 3 divided by 8, if you go ahead and put that in your calculator, you're going to get a number of 0.375. You can then divide these, 550 divided by 0.375. You should get a number of 14.6 is a repeating decimal. Still money. I know I need to round to this spot right here. So that's going to equal $14.67 per 1 pound. So, comparing the three, I know that the most expensive would like this to be in a different color. So the most expensive is the roast beef. Because that one cost $14.67 per pound. And then the least expensive, you go back and look at the others, you should see that the least expensive is the ham. The ham was $8.29 per pound. And there's our practice problems.